Thank you guys so much. So disclaimer, I am talking about sex for a solid 8 minutes. So if you're a little bit sensitive to that, I won't be offended if you need to leave the room. But all right, let's get started. So how many of you guys have had the talk with your parents? You know, the birds and the bees. Next slide, please. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, cool, there's a few of us, but not too many of us. And I personally wouldn't be able to raise my hand either. I remember when I was heading off to college, I asked my mom, hey, so how come we never had the sex talk? And she looked at me and was like, well, I never talked about that with my parents. Just don't do it before you're married or you'll regret it. And that was the extent of my sex talk with my mom. She couldn't even say the word sex out loud. So if that's off the table, then how did I learn about sex in the first place? Well, I learned from the internet, of course. A lot of my friends learned from talking to each other, but I was too embarrassed to talk about it out loud, so the website that saved me was Go Ask Alice. It's an online forum where students from Columbia University can ask questions about sexual health and relationships. So I had a lot of Catholic guilt growing up. I used to pray to God and apologize every time I'd masturbate, and I was low-key convinced that I was going through boy puberty because I was like, oh, it's kind of unnatural for a girl to touch herself, no? But when I went on Go Ask Alice, I realized, oh, sorry, previous slide, I did not mean to point. So when I went on Go Ask Alice, they said that not only is masturbation normal, but it's actually good for your health. Boy, I was relieved, no pun intended. So yeah, I mean, imagine though, if I'd gone on a website that didn't have reliable information, or if I tried to learn by experimentation with someone who knew as little as I did, it could have ended catastrophically. I could have ended up with an STI or even pregnant at a really young age. Next slide. So here's some statistics. So 40% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders almost or never discuss safe sex or condoms with their sexual partner. Next slide. And 69% of Asian Americans and 56% of Pacific Islanders have never been tested for HIV. Now these statistics are really alarming. Because there is a stigma surrounding talking about sexual health, we are not reaching out to resources that can protect the health of ourselves and also of people that we love. So in almost every Asian culture, premarital sex is taboo to talk about. And that might be for religious or community reasons, whatnot. But if we have a stigma about this, then it's also really isolating. You might feel like you're the only one struggling with something that's very universal to the human experience. I mean, come on, everybody does it. So, next slide. If talking about sex altogether is off the table, then what about unconventional sex? So, the only threesome that I ever talked about with my parents were career options: doctor, lawyer, engineer. Yeah. So, I was a weird kid, though. I remember when I was about 7 years old, I used to derive a lot of joy from tying up my Barbie dolls and reenacting that one scene from the Sailor Moon R movie where all the Sailor Scouts are tied up and forced to watch Sailor Moon suffer. Yeah, so that was burned into my mind. In hindsight, I realized it's because I'm kinky. And I never wanted to admit that when I was growing up. I was super self-conscious. During break time, I remember I would pretend not to understand my friends' dirty jokes because I wanted to be kind of like this, you know? Keep it all inside of me, and yeah. But things changed for me when I got to college. Yeah, I know, Rila Kuma, gotta love it. Things changed for me when I got to college. I went to UCLA and joined a group called Pan-Asian Queers. And this group is a social group that met up at the LGBT Center every week. And we would talk about the intersectionality of culture and identity. What that really meant was that we would watch RuPaul's Drag Race and Fresh Off the Boat every meeting. But I remember after the first meeting, we had dinner, and there was one guy who was telling us all about his sexcapades. And I looked him dead in the eye and was like, so, how does it work, this, butt sex? And that was a turning point for me because, boy, he went off and he told me and a whole table of people all about it. And I realized something in that moment. That I was in a double closet. I was closeted about my bisexuality, and I was closeted about my sexual curiosity. And I realized that I wanted to change, that I wanted to be proud of who I am and what I like. So fast forward a few years, and I ended up becoming the facilitator and president of Pan-Asian Queers. And I was really open about talking about my sexual preference and sexuality. But there was one side of me I had yet to explore, and that was my kinky side. But that's until, actually, I saw on Facebook one of my acquaintances was interested in a rope bondage 101 class. And I didn't know there were classes for this kind of stuff, so I got really excited. I was messaging him like, hey, dude, do you want to carpool? And he messaged me back and was like, oh, I said I was interested as a joke. Needless to say, I went anyways, and I had a blast without him. So after that, I started frequenting a lot of BDSM dungeons, and I went to a lot of different classes to learn more about the community. And I've seen everything at these play parties that are like kind of crazy. Like, I've seen people being suspended from the ceilings with ropes. I've seen people getting lit on fire. I've seen knives being traced across skin and other delicate bits. And I know that sounds really scary if you're not involved in the scene at all. And there's a lot of misconception about BDSM through really the only media coverage being like 50 Shades of Grey. But the thing that's like swept under the rug about BDSM is that there's a whole culture around clear and enthusiastic consent. So, oh, this slide's fun. I forgot this existed. Here you go. I'll be having it my way and you'll be loving it. All right, next slide. Clear and enthusiastic consent. So really, when you have these extreme forms of play, you gotta be able to communicate to each other what you like, what you don't like, what's the safe word. And the safe word really is just how you know that, okay, no actually means no, like you need to stop. And if we have a stigma about talking about our preferences, then we're not gonna be able to have fun safely. These forms of play can be quite dangerous if you and your partner don't coordinate well enough. So I think that the Asian American community can learn a lot from the BDSM community about clear communication and that kind of healthy culture and talking about what you like and what you don't like. And another thing that I learned from the BDSM community is also about my preferences. Now, I identify as a switch, which means I like being dominant sometimes, I like being submissive other times. And I had a very hard time coming to terms with my submissive side because, well, there's a stereotype, the Asian waifu. I didn't want to be the Asian waifu. She's docile and submissive and just innocent, right? But she's also fetishized for those very qualities. And on a day-to-day basis, I'm a go-getter. I was a valedictorian of my high school. I went to UCLA for electrical engineering, and I'm a full-time hustling singer-songwriter. And yet, somehow I felt like I was conforming to a stereotype that people had about me with this Asian waifu thing. And so I took a step back and thought about it more, and I realized that the whole point of why we fight for equality is so that we can do whatever we want and be whoever we want. So a stay-at-home house mom shouldn't feel guilty for holding back the feminist movement, for wanting to stay at home with her kids. And the same thing goes for an Asian woman who wants to have a submissive role in a power dynamic. She shouldn't feel bad for wanting that. Next slide. So, shameless plug, not that kind. As I said, I'm a pop singer-songwriter, and I hope to make music that empowers people. I want to open up conversations that we might be a little bit uncomfortable having through music. I write songs about self-love, sex positivity, especially from a female's point of view, and I also want to capture my experience as a queer Asian American woman growing up in LA. And so if you want to find out more about my adventures, like how did she go from electrical engineering to music, it's all on my Instagram. It's kind of like a video photo diary. Follow me on Facebook. And one last shameless plug is that your girl is looking for a day job. So if you know any engineering opportunities, please come find me. I have resumes. Okay, thank you guys so much.